Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This is where we have conversations with guests about life, loss, grief, and grief dreams, which can be dreams of your loved ones that have passed away. So if you want to know more about the topic, you can definitely check out our website, griefdreams.ca, for more information. And here are 4 ways you can help support the podcast and help us spread awareness on this amazing topic. So number 1, subscribe and rate the podcast on the platform that you listen to it on. Number 2, become a member of the podcast, and that's for as low as $1.50 a month. This helps us run the podcast, and you can find the Patreon link in the show notes. Number 3, you can take the Grief Dreams online course by Dr. Joshua Black at griefdreams.ca. And lastly, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Facebook at Grief Dreams. And now on to the show.
The new beginning.
Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. My name is Sean Ram alongside Dr. Joshua Black. On today's podcast, we have with us Dr. Roger Ivar Lohmann, and he is an Associate Professor of Anthropology at Trent University. He has published extensively about the relationship between dreaming and culture, including dream travelers, sleep experiences, and culture in the Western Pacific. An ethnographer of the Asabano people of Papua New Guinea, he has served as editor-in-chief of the journal Reviews in Anthropology, chair of the Association for Social Anthropology in Oceania, and president of the Green Party of Ontario. Roger, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. But, with the magic of editing, we'll make that sound great.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited for this episode for a couple of reasons. One was I went to Trent University for my master's, which it's when I really started to, try to understand this topic of grief dreams a lot more. And then I found your article later on when it came to how you look at dreams with anthropology. And I was so amazed and so awestruck by it all. But I was also very disappointed that I didn't get a chance to sit down and talk to you while I was starting my career, because there's a lot of information there that I'm using now that I would have used back then. So I just want to thank you for the work you're doing. And it's just sad that we never got a chance to connect, or no one pointed me to you on campus.
Well, thank you. It's great to know that someone discovers your work, out there eventually. You never know. And I have to say, life is 90% missed opportunities. So it's always interesting to keep following up.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm really curious for you. How did you get into anthropology? As we were talking off air, you're the first person I know who went this direction. And so what takes a man to go this way?
Well, I think it really has to do with just wanting to understand people. And we are humans. So on the one hand, anthropology is about our favorite subject, ourselves. So you just want to understand yourself and how you think and why you do things. But a lot of anthropology is focused on other people who are not yourself, or people who live in other societies. And so since I was a kid in school, I found myself surprised and confused by the way my fellow human beings behaved. Why did they do the things that they did? They weren't the things that I would do. Or I would notice myself thinking in a certain way, and I was like, why do I find that interesting and that not interesting? I was interested in, other people living in other parts of the world. How do they live? Why do they live differently than we do? Or people in the past, their lives were so different. To me, it was just a curiosity about our own species, including myself.
And so what have you learned about yourself by studying other people?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think one thing that I've learned, that's a tough question, actually. One thing I've learned is that other people do not think like me. I tend to assume that other people must think like me, and I'm just missing something. But the lesson that's really come home to me is that I actually think differently in many ways from many people around me. And of course, the same is true for everybody. We maybe expect others to be thinking just as we do. And of course, there is lots of overlap, but there are also some really big differences, sometimes about foundational issues that we're not necessarily aware of.
Yeah, that's a great thing to learn. I think for everybody to learn something like that, because for me, that would lead into a lot more, I guess, empathy and compassion. Well, empathy and sympathy for another person if you can understand why they are different. Because otherwise, then you might get, I guess, slighted and maybe feel like somebody should act a certain way. But if you can understand it from an anthropological context, then you'd say, okay, I can understand why this person might act like that. That's something for me growing up as well. I was very curious about why, how people turned out, how they turned out. Like for me, just in my own life, like my parents immigrated to Canada from India, so just understanding that, and how I turn out, even just physical aspects, how I turn out the way I am over here, how people in India have evolved over time and developed, like, and what the foods we eat, how that plays a part in a society and a culture. And what's incredible is how this all, a lot of genetics plays a part in that, and how it happens over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And now we're in a spot in the world where movement is a lot more possible. Like, thousands and thousands of years, people didn't move that often, other than, I guess you're talking about like big transitions from, like, let's say Siberia to like North America and stuff like that. But now everybody's flying around, moving to different countries, so it's even more, I think, important to kind of understand where we all came from in the beginning.
Boy, you've said a mouthful there. There's a lot going on in what you just said. I mean, the point about empathy, by being able to you know trying to understand other people who are different from us, does give us a sense of empathy. And interestingly, empathy is also a way to understand people that are different. I was tempted to, when you asked me the first question, to tell a story from my childhood that I sometimes think led to my being an anthropologist, and so maybe I will tell it. And I was a little boy in the schoolyard at recess break, and I had found a toad by the side of a fence, and was holding up the toad and admiring it, and I showed it to a little boy who was with me, and I was all excited, and he took the toad from my hand, put it on the ground, and stomped on it and laughed. And I was, first of all, horrified, but I was most deeply surprised and
Mm.
shocked, because to me that was such a just an incomprehensible thing to do. And so I think we're all struck with people who are behave differently than us, and an instant reaction may be, when we disapprove, to feel dislike, hatred, or just rejection. But that's really missing the point. Not only does it get us into trouble because we fight and so on, and
Mm.
sometimes kill each other over such things, but it also it's one of those missed opportunities, because it's when you see people thinking and acting differently than you do, that's a hint that there's something else going on. They have reasons for doing things what they do, and to them it makes sense, and to them it fits in. So for them it's not wrong. So and that's a primary insight of anthropology. And your second point about comparing life in India to here, and that there's a genetic component as well as a cultural component. That's absolutely important in anthropology too. Something I didn't mention was that we bring together the study of biology with the study of culture. We study languages. We also study the human past through material remains that people left behind. So we're really bringing together all the possible sources of information we can find together to understand human commonality and human difference.
Yeah, without anthropology to kind of put it all together, from my understanding, I think we wouldn't have as much of a sense of what goes on 10,000 years ago, or 20,000, or however long you want to go back. Because, and you could speak on this more, the sciences seem to be a little bit more isolated, or they're kind of in silos in a lot of ways. But I think, and for me, from my understanding, anthropology kind of paints the picture a little more clear.
Yes, at its best, anthropology is a holistic discipline where we bring together all these different approaches. And indeed, it's not just limited to the material that people who call themselves anthropologists find, but I personally, for example, get a lot of value from work done in psychology and history and and even the physical sciences in support my thinking in many ways. So we do try to bring together all those different perspectives to get the fullest understanding possible.
And then I can understand many people not wanting to or may not include dreams in their study, but you do. So what led you to look at dreams as part of your topic of interest?
It's kind of it's a strange journey in a way. It's not something I set out to study. My first interest really was studying religion. I wanted to. Here was a case where I saw people believing very fervently in things for which there was no scientific evidence, and there were. It wasn't just like one religion. There were hundreds of different religions with mutually contradictory claims, and yet people were treating them with such great seriousness. And how could they believe these things? What was convincing them to believe in these things? So that's how I came to dreams, actually, because I noticed pretty fast that dreams was one source of information that people would rely on to become convinced that a certain spirit being is real or a certain God was real, that they should have a certain relationship with that spirit or God. And that's what religions have in common. You have a belief in a supernatural or a spiritual being or power or more than one, and that there's an understanding that you should have a certain relationship with those beings. So all religions share that, but then they differ on which spirits or forces exist and what relationships we're supposed to have with them. But all of them, I would say, in my studies, I find it's extremely common that religious people will be able to point to some dreams that have influenced their beliefs.
Yeah, when I read that just in the one article that you had, it was floored with the types of beliefs and how they did convince people. They even can convert people to a new belief system or culture. Can you talk about how dreams can also not only maintain a belief, but also can help change it?
Sure. Yeah, they're really good at both of those jobs. So to convert from one belief system to another, dreams are terribly important force in that. Gosh, where to start? There's so much going on here. Well, for one thing, if you think about it, imagine a situation like the Asabano people I studied faced. You've grown up with a certain religion, but then you've got a foreigner come to live in your home and tell your people, you guys have it all wrong. You're worshiping the wrong spirits, or you've got the wrong idea about reality. You should be following my God, and my God is the only true one. What would convince people to go along with something like that when it's a contradiction of what their own group has stood for, what their own parents have brought them up to do, and so on. But one of the major forces that helped them bridge that gap was their dreams. And that's because people would hear a story, say there is a God, and when you die, you can go to heaven or hell. So that'll be a completely foreign idea to the Asabano traditionally. But then after they hear these things, they would dream. And in their dreams, some of these stories that they were hearing from the missionaries would be played out in their dreams. And I think we're all familiar that if you have something that happens in your daily life, especially something that's new or something that you're working on learning, quite often the imagery of that new thing will appear in your dream. And so what happens quite often in the case of religions is people will see this repetition of this imagery, or it's being played out in their dream, and they will take that as visual confirmation of the truth of what they've just learned. So in this case, I had people telling me that they had actually dreamed of visiting God. God spoke to them, or they saw heaven. They saw what heaven looked like. They met angels. They were transported to heaven. They saw the fires of hell. So, and based on these experiences, then they thought, a missionary must be telling the truth. So now, if I can back up for a second to a scientific perspective on what's happening here, we now know that one of the things that's going on with dreams scientifically is that dreams are imagery that's being shown in the brain that is comparing recent experiences to earlier experiences and earlier understandings from memory. So what we're seeing in dreams is the brain's memory updating system in operation. It's comparing images. And so, I mean, this is familiar too, I think, for most people who paid any attention to their dreams. You may notice your dreams are illogical or things will skip. You were talking to your wife one minute and then it turned out your wife was actually your son. And you might wake up worrying about that. What did that mean? But in fact, it's having to do simply with association. The images that are associated, including the new thing that's unfamiliar and the older thing that's more familiar, are being compared by the brain and its autonomous memory updating system. But when we're dreaming, we're witnessing that happening. We're witnessing those images being compared. And then, especially after we wake up, we're trying to make sense of that, and we try to turn it into a story. And depending on what we believe dreams are, and that will be an element of culture, something we've learned, what dreams are, that'll change how what we think the dream actually showed. And I'll tell you, most people, of course, are not educated in the latest dream science to know what dreams really are, and even if they are, they may doubt it. They may prefer to trust more traditional explanations of what dreams are, including the idea that dreams are not merely imaginary in any way, but they are actually showing things that are really happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of cultures out there, and at the end of the day too, there's a lot we don't know. I wish we could see all the dreams, like one day we will be able to hook someone up and see exactly what they're dreaming, and then we can actually understand the topic even more so. But yeah, I know there's like a researcher at Trent University too, Dr. Kyle Smith. He was really into like a heads up dreaming. He wrote a book on it about like the precog aspect of these dreams. And that in itself is kind of interesting to sort of even think about. And I know a lot of these cultures have those type of thoughts too, how dreams can predict the future in different ways. And for me, I'm just like sitting on the sidelines saying, I wonder, I don't know, right? Like there's so much to this life, I just don't know. But one thing we do know is a lot of these dreams, anyways, do reflect, as what you're saying, just our minds trying to work through what we're trying to learn, what we're going through, our emotions, our waking day state, what we're watching, even the things we eat. There's so many aspects of it that are out now, which is really good. So I kind of like that because there's a lot of guidance you can give for people who do have nightmares, which before, like when I grew up, my parents told me nightmares were the devil, like in disguise for a lot of times, or the nightmare. And so I was totally afraid of this stuff. But now, as I sort of went through school, I realized, no, like these nightmares are just reflective of being in an unsafe environment and working through the grief and being bullied, all that sort of stuff. And it came into my dreams to sort of try to work through that and try to, I would say, educate myself on what I'm not dealing with in waking life. But I could see that even in my own life. And I can't imagine other cultures on what they do with that information, given that they believe, as your article was saying, that they'll dream. If they dream something, they'll take everything to be, let's say, the soul traveling or a visitation of some sort. And how do you deal with nightmares, or how do you deal with those negative dreams that happen? Because that in itself, if it's a loved one or if it's something else, like what do you do to reduce those, other than, like, for me, my view is like, well, you deal with the waking life issue, and then those dreams should decrease. But like for them, like, how, I guess the question for you is, how do people who believe that these are, I guess, outwardly like the soul traveling and stuff, how do they deal with those negative dreams?
Right. Well, the answer depends on what people believe dreams are and what they've learned in their culture or developed in their own. Of course, every person has a culture in our own mind. It's just representations of the world that we share with one another, so depending on what you believe dreams are, there's going to be different solutions possible. My favorite solution in my personal life and also just as a scholar is to find out, as best we can, what is the scientific explanation of a dream. And so if we know what the physiological and the cultural causes are of us to have certain imagery appear in certain circumstances in our sleep, then we're going to be able to deal with that reality in a realistic way. So now, most people, do not choose to or do not have the opportunity to become educated in what dreams actually are from a scientific point of view, as best as we understand. And indeed, we don't fully. Not like we're done. There's always more to learn, for sure. But we know a lot. But most people do not choose to or are not able to do that. And so what people often do is they come up with their own working models, their own explanations. So you talked about your parent explanation that a nightmare is the devil appearing to you. So they would be then, in my parlance, subscribing to a visitation theory, a cultural dream theory, a theory of what dreams are that's learned in your culture. That's what a cultural dream theory is. That's I would call the visitation theory, namely that we are to explain dreams as the visitations to us by some other kind of being, typically a spirit being. So in this case, it was a devil of some kind that was visiting you and tormenting you in the dream. But then now if you have you explain from your own experience in life, if you then use a different cultural dream theory, a different explanation of what dreams are, either a scientific one or an ethnic one that's not science-based, you're going to get a different answer as to what that imagery was, and the implications are going to be different for how you can deal with it. So if you believe in the visitation theory and that those nightmares are devil visits, well, then you're going to have to figure out a way to deal with the devil visits. You maybe find a way to exclude the devil from visiting you. Maybe give a sacrifice to this devil. Maybe get some kind of assistance from some other kind of spirit being to help you. So people would deal with it using those kinds of methods based on that kind of belief system. But say if you had a different theory of what dreams are, say it was a soul travel theory, as you mentioned. That's another cultural dream theory. A common cultural dream theory is that what dreams are actually is what a person's soul sees as it travels outside the body. Obviously not a scientific theory, but a very common cultural dream theory in many ethnic societies, including in Canada for sure. A lot of people have ideas like these everywhere. So if you have a soul travel theory, then if you're seeing an image, say, of a scary being, you may not have a category devil to put it in, but you'll think what you've seen is you've been traveling outside your body and you've actually witnessed some nasty thing or being. And so then the implications for that and how to deal with it would be different. You might try not to go to that place anymore in your dreams. Say that I went there and it was a bad thing. Or I know some Asabano people told me that they found, although they would have scary dreams, and many of them, if they were soul travel dreams, they didn't have to worry because since their body wasn't along, they couldn't actually be harmed. So they felt actually safe in their dreams if they were having a scary dream. But that's based on a different cultural dream theory. So you can see how there's as many answers to your question as there would be cultural dream theories.
I think it's just so fascinating because we don't, as you said, like we are not educated when it comes to dreams, and especially with all the grief that's going on, well, now in the pandemic and, just in the past, we need to sort of just update our understanding on how people work with dreams to understand how they work with these kind of grief dreams. And I think that's sort of the whole point of the show, is like raising awareness on those aspects and dreams of the deceased, because a lot of times people don't ask, but yet they can have a huge impact in how people work through their grief and what it represents, and the fact of what they're working through in their grief. Because these dreams, as you said, like even if they're positive or negative, they can be taken in a certain way that may hinder them or may scare them and may complicate their grief in many ways. But if we're not asking about these dreams, we're not doing the full job of a support staff to really help them out through the grief journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First off, I would comment that dreaming is something that's not only is it going back to the beginning of humankind, but it's well before. I mean, dreaming is something that's shared by all mammals, and indeed there's evidence that other animals some other animals are also dreaming. So there's something here that's a biological evolutionary thing that goes way back before culture. It goes back before our species, well before our species. And But humans are one of the things that makes humans different from other animals that anthropologists like to point to is we have language, and so because we have language, we are able to describe things that are not present. And we're able to communicate those things to one another. So you can imagine that if you had a dream, say someone you love died, and you had a dream of them that might be a scary dream. They might have been threatening you, say, or it might be a reassuring dream. You'd see that person happy or something. Doesn't matter. If you don't have language, you can't communicate that to anybody else. So you may form an idea about what it meant, about what that dream meant. You might have your own little cultural dream theory, but if you had sufficient intelligence to think that far about it, but without language, you wouldn't be able to communicate to anybody else, so it would die with you. So there would be no development into full-fledged theories like this. Certainly no scientific theories would be possible, of course, without language either. So I think that's what makes the difference, is that we can talk about these things in our species. And you're right that goes back as long as language does. And if you're going to ask me how far language goes back, I can't give you the answer. We don't have a definite word on that yet, but it goes back pretty darn far. So I wanted to mention too the idea of how whether people should take dreams more seriously, especially say in counseling to help one another who are suffering a loss, for example. And I wanted to point out that one thing that's common at least in the society that I have been associated with for the most part in North America, one common idea is that dreams are not important. There's something it doesn't mean anything. This is just your imagination throwing up random stuff. It's not important, and you'd best forget about it. And so I call that the cultural dream theory of nonsense theory, that what dreams are is just nonsense. So if it's nonsense, you don't have to worry about it. So one of the great things about nonsense theory is you don't worry about it. You if you have a scary dream, it was just something. It was just a dream. It was nothing. So if your child woke up with a nightmare, you wouldn't say, "Oh gosh, that was a devil visiting you," and scaring you even more. You'd say, "Don't worry about it. That was just a dream. It was nothing." And so that can be a great comfort to anyone. So the other edge of that, though, is that if you have a nonsense dream theory and you say dreams are not reflecting anything real, then if someone comes to you and says, "Oh, I had this moving dream. I saw my deceased wife, and I saw she's okay and she's in heaven, and I'm so happy about that," it can be hard to tell her, "Well, there's no scientific evidence for heaven, and there's no, we don't have soul travel evidence. There's no evidence for souls. So although this dream might be comforting to you, maybe it's comforting for the wrong reasons." So that leads to a difficulty, I think, there, because we talked earlier about empathy. We want to sympathize with people, help them adjust emotionally. On the other hand, I think it's important that we don't mislead people into false belief, and that's a huge challenge since, of course, we humans are not always sure what's false and what's true ourselves.
Yeah. Here's an idea, though. Do you think it's kind of throwing the baby with the bathwater if you go with the idea that they're nonsense and just don't even worry about it? Because from my understanding, dreams provide a lot of information. They provide it's almost like it's a mystery in itself of what uses. You guys know best, but you've got a lot of potential there for information and knowledge. But if you just throw it out, there's a lot of good things that you could be missing out.
That's a really excellent point. I have to say, personally, I'm not a subscriber to nonsense theory fully, so that I personally always make an effort to match as closely as I can to a scientific understanding of things. And so, and you're right. I mean, if dreams are, I gave an explanation from some of the latest science that dreams are what the autonomous mind is showing and comparing images of past and more recent events to try and update its understandings of things. So that's not nonsense. That means there's something happening there that we could pay attention to. So if you were experiencing, for example, recurrent imagery of some kind, that's showing that your brain is still trying to process this. It's not succeeding in processing it. Whereas if you have an imagery that you can relate to a recent event that appears in dreams, but that doesn't keep reappearing, but disappears, that would seem to be some evidence that you've been able to adjust to that. You're moving on. And of course, then people of religious backgrounds would, of course, also say, of course, we mustn't say dreams are nonsense. They are God speaking to us, or they're our chance to visit heaven, or what have you. So they would have a different explanation again that would also support the notion that dreams are not nonsense. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, it being a scientific, reason behind that, like, and just dumbing it down, for my purposes, if it's there in our genetics, if it's been with us, if it's there with us today, you think there'd be a genetic purpose for that?
Right. Yeah, it's true. Well, that's an interesting point. That why do we see dreaming so widespread in so many living things, and that was a mystery for a long time, and perhaps it's not fully solved. But I think the idea that dreams are reflecting, the mind's updating its understanding of reality, that any living thing, any animal needs to learn, things going through life, and so that would be a necessary skill. And we do know that the brain is very active while asleep as well. So there's stuff going on there that's necessary, not just updating memory, but other things.
Yeah, I tend to look at that just personally, where like dreams could be very useful, but remembering them could not be. So we could just all have dreams, but just not remember them as we have evolved. But for some reason, we're remembering them. And I think there's something key about that, because there's certain dreams that are just more important than others, and you can sort of, when I look at them, and you see that, and I think it goes back to a point where you're saying there's these different theories, but when I talk to a lot of people, there's multiple theories going on at the same time, and it's really like guiding people to use discernment as best as possible when picking which theory to use when trying to understand their dream, just because of the complications that can happen with a misinterpretation.
For sure. And I mean, I like the point you make. I mean, people are typically using more than one cultural dream theory at the same time, and they're using mix and match to try and come up with something. So we don't want to be too simplistic in our description of their cultural dream theories either. And not to mention, so there's the two sides. If you're a researcher or a therapist, you're studying dreams as a scholar for some reason. You also need to be aware of what is your theory of, what is your scientific or your humanistic or your religious theory of dreaming. How can you use it to make sense of what you're observing, and also maybe how might you test that theory if you have of a scientific bent to improve it, to find ways in which it doesn't fit, ways in which it needs to be corrected.
And I want to just jump ahead now, or jump back. I don't know where we're jumping, but to your time, because I read, I don't know if this is true. Was it a year and a half you spent living with the Asabano people?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Could you tell us about that time and why you picked them out of all the other, I guess, places you could have went?
Oh, yeah. Goodness. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of different peoples living in New Guinea, so it's one of the most linguistically and culturally diverse parts of the world. But why did I choose them and that part of the world? I wanted to, when I chose anthropology to study, I really wanted to get away from my own culture, my own people. I wanted to see something completely different, and one thing I wanted to get away from was Christianity. Ironically, I ended up studying Christians because there's Christians are many in Papua New Guinea as well. Although I did study their pre-Christian religion too. But so one of my motives was to find people that are very different from me, and I wanted to find people who had not been studied by anthropologists, at least not in any degree before, so they were unknown. I wanted to contribute to scientific knowledge in that way, in a new way. And so New Guinea was a good place for that because it was one of the last parts of the world to be colonized by people from other parts of the world. It was colonized, at least my part of New Guinea where I work, was colonized by Germany and Britain, and then later Australia. and then in 1975, the country of Papua New Guinea got its independence. But the people that I study themselves, they had been first contacted by outsiders directly not until 1963. So they're one of the last peoples in the world to be contacted by true outsiders as part of the colonial expansion that's been going on for 500 or so years and is now pretty much transforming into something a little different. But so because of that, there were people there that remembered before contact. They remembered the way their culture was in many ways, and of course, they were still not completely living like people in other parts of the world live. They were still living their ways differently. So in trying to choose a particular people to study in New Guinea, I narrowed it down to people of the interior because that was less studied, and there were smaller groups. I liked the idea of studying a small group where I could get to know almost everybody, and I wanted people that still remembered their old religion. And so on the one hand, it was a bad choice because the place where the Asabano people live was an epicenter of a Christian revival movement that swept the whole center of New Guinea. But not long before that, there was no Christianity. But I ended up thinking, well, I'm going to study these people anyway. First of all, I loved the place; it was beautiful. The people were wonderful and very kind and helpful. But also, the phenomenon of religious conversion itself was worth studying. Why would these people abandon their traditional religion, which they had relied on, for something completely foreign? And so I went ahead and studied Christians.
That's really funny, actually.
No escape. No escape.
But what a unique moment in time for you to be able to study the people, because you said, right, cultures change so fast, especially with the age we're living in now, and to be able to be a part of that, because you'll get so many new insights you wouldn't get, 20, 30 years from now, because people remember the old ways, the old way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it's really a ship in a bottle type of experience. And when I look at my own family's past, like I come from a family that was converted. Like my grandfathers were converted from, to be honest, I don't even know, Hinduism, maybe Sikhism, into Christianity. But there in India, northern Punjab, you had, industrialization happened before then. The British had kind of, there. So there's too many variables there to kind of, I guess, do a deep dive into why the conversion happened. But here, I know you've got Christianity coming in and doing that, but it's still probably less tainted than, if you will, than my situation.
Yes, it was a simpler situation, and the change was more recent. So that made it easier to study in that way. But a point that comes from what you're saying too is that all times are interesting times. It's not like cultures are going to stop changing. I used to be worried that all the tribal peoples of the world were being contacted, and I would never get to study a group that was really different. And so, in a sense, that's true. But on the other hand, things keep changing and they keep being interesting. And one thing that sort of shocked me that I came to realize, you go to the other side of the planet to study people who believe things that are completely different. And then I studied the kinds of, for example, the beliefs they had about dreams, that dreams are your soul traveling, or they believed that dreams were visitations from spirits, or they believed that in dreams, if you did something, it could have an effect on the future. So they had various beliefs about dreams, and I thought, these are exotic beliefs of a foreign culture. But then the more I talked about these things back at home, I realized people in North America have very similar beliefs. They claim that so-called Westerners are scientific, but they're not. They are, they believe in that if you see a person who's died, you're happy that they're still alive. It's like, but no, they're dead. Sorry. But so they will. These same kinds of beliefs will reappear even in a society that has a strong scientific tradition also. So to me, that showed me, one, It's not like there's exotic cultures over there and there's normal cultures over here. We're all exotic. and two, it shows us that cultures are all continually changing too. It's not like there's a moment when history begins, a moment when first contact happens, and then everything is different. There's always contacts coming and going, and movements and changes, and they're still ongoing. And one of my favorite things to think about is, we when we look back in history, sometimes we'll say, how could people have been so stupid as to do do what they did? For example, in the old days when they put in electric wiring in the first days, they didn't think it was necessary to put the wires out of reach or to cover them with insulators, and so people were electrocuted in their own homes. How could they be stupid to do that? But then it makes you think, well, we eventually learned that by doing that to stop doing that stupid thing. But today we do stupid things too, like we destroy our ecosystem. We destroy the basis of our livelihood by being so careless with the earth and poisoning the atmosphere and the oceans. And it's a political battle to get people to change that. So so in the future, people will look upon what we do now, and we think we're doing the right thing with similar amazement.
I think it's definitely similar in that, you could look at anything and people have different opinions, but at the same time, like guys were alluding to earlier, people are using multiple theories to explain these dreams. And I think the internet has a huge part to play in that, is because now people are learning about other cultures and using some of these other theories. And that's the speed at which it's happening. I think now is I think the speed has changed. Where now, especially in North America, people are gathering that information at a crazy rate. So it's an exciting time, and I'm interested to see what happens in the future.
Very true. Yes. Yeah. It does speed everything up, and also it increases the distance at which information can travel quickly. But in a way, people often remark that how different that is, and true. Point taken. However, it's also sort of continuing what we've always done. We've lived in our villages, and we've bounced ideas off of each other, and then you talk to the people in the next village, and you get some different ideas from them, and you bring them home. So in a way, we're just continuing what we've always done.
We for sure, except now you can join a Facebook group and hear about some theory, and then you can go on Twitter, and there's two more theories that are different that are
That's right, and you have that sense of community of fellow believers. That's so important in getting people to accept beliefs that are contrary to physical evidence. If you have a lot of people around you who are saying, no, this is really true, especially a group that you belong to, that's a strong, powerful mover for people to accept these beliefs.
It's a dangerous time, Roger.
Yes, it is.
There's one thing I'd like to talk about. The one thing that I was kind of shocked with, because it didn't really come up in anything I've ever done before or seen before. And it was the story of how the Asabano people, I guess some currently do, they used to, I guess more in the past, believe in the power of witchcraft, and how witches could kill other people, and then people would dream of the deceased telling them who was the witch in town, and then they would then kill that person. And I thought that was really fascinating, because that's not something we really talk about too often, on how impactful these dreams can be in people's actions and these types of actions. And I can only imagine how that would have been used in even in our society, but when people kept killing, what's it called, the witches,
Salem witch trials.
Salem witch trials. I could see them using that type of theory also in a different way. So could you talk about that, and then also the dream that helped save the life? I think it's also really interesting.
Oh, okay. Well, you'll have to remind me of that second point, but I'll do the witch part first. Yes. I mean, I think this is a point that shows why understanding the scientific truth of the matter is important, actually, even though it may be traditional to do things a certain way, and that tradition may have a beauty and people may love it. But when people take their beliefs seriously and they don't actually match with reality, they act according to those beliefs, and that can lead to bad things happening. And so the witch executions, so-called witch executions, was an example of that. where, as you said, people would dream. So someone dies. The fact that someone died was itself seen as evidence that there are witches and that witches use magical powers to kill people. Because if it weren't for that, people wouldn't die. Why do people die? Well, because someone wants them to die. That's a classic religious explanation that things happen for a reason, and that reason is someone's will. So witchcraft beliefs around the world have that in common, that things happen because of a will of a person or a spirit or something. So if all deaths happen because of a person who has these witch powers to do it, that means that a death is evidence of a witch from their point of view. Okay, now the question then isn't was this death really caused by a witch? The question is, who is the witch, and what should we do about it? And so to find out the identity of the witch may not be easy. One strategy that they would do in the old days, especially, was they would think about who would have had a bone to pick with that person, who would have been having an argument with them. That might be an indicator of who was likely to have used witchcraft against them. But quite often there wasn't they didn't believe there was a particular reason. In their belief system, witchcraft was caused by having one's belly infested by baby spirit animals, and these baby spirit animals made you hungry for human flesh. So it's a kind of cannibal belief, and so that would cause you to then kill people, and then you eat the body, and that's part of your sustenance, basically. So then they understood witches to think of people as being their meat, and so then to figure out who is the witch, one of the best ways for them in the old days was to see dreams. If you see a dream of a certain person doing a witchcraft on the person, that would be taken as if it were evidence that they had an eyewitness account. If you believe that dreams are actually, say, soul travel, or that they're pictures that are being shown to you by spirit beings, which is another idea that they had. So if they're taking seriously dreams as being more than just mental images, that means that they can put them into the service of witchcraft beliefs and also accusations, and then also executions, because they believed in the old days that the only way to stop witches was to kill them. So I heard several heartbreaking stories of people who had been identified as a witch. A vigilante mob assembled, and they went to that person, killed them, and threw their body in the river. And the reason they threw the body in the river was because they believed that if the body was destroyed by being broken up by the rocks on the river as it washed downstream, the soul would also be destroyed, and then it wouldn't be able to come back and cause more damage. So what people believe about dreams does matter. It can lead to very harmful things, and it can lead to benevolent things as well.
And I believe some of those dreams may have the deceased telling them who the witch is. Would that be accurate too?
Sure, and this could also happen when the person is not yet dead. They might themselves have a dream, and they would say, "Oh, I saw who attacked me," or they might have an impression for whatever reason, and they would say that I think it's so and so, and that could be taken as enough reason to go and kill that person. Now that's changed since one of the. So I'm an atheist, and I celebrate when people leave religion. However, one of the pluses, in my view, of their converting to Christianity was that they changed their violent behaviors toward one another. So instead of killing a person accused of witch, they still believe in witches, but they deal with it by prayer now instead. So I think that's a much better way.
So you admitted it on this podcast. All right.
And I did.
Yeah, they really could have used their own version of Sherlock Holmes, eh? Like some sort of, logical
well,
detective.
they would say that that's not the real reason. So you could say, when you encounter people who believe in magical death like that, you could say, well, you say a witch caused this man to die, but look, his head's been bashed in, by a tree that fell on him. And they'd say, well, yes,
that person's
but why?
got a rock that's got blood on it.
They'd say, yes, but why did the tree fall on him? Why did he trip? And that had to have been caused by witchcraft. So And that's, again, a typically religious way of approaching the world. You don't just accept physical cause and effect for itself. You always assume there has to be a reason of someone's desire, someone's willpower that made something happen this way, be it a spirit, a god, or another person.
That definitely puts the control back into your life so you can minimize that occurring again. I can see like why people sort of do that, just a way to sort of feel safer in the
It's really interesting you say that. As I've often heard that explanation. It gives people a sense of control. And I see your point, but I'm often struck by the opposite side, because if anybody can be a witch and can just kill me, does that really give me control? I mean, I can watch out for dangers in the environment instead, and not be constantly walking in fear of my life of witches. And people do walk in fear of witches. If they hear a bird sing that they're not expecting, they will often think there's a witch there, and they're terrified.
It's probably the lesser of two evils, because if you already don't understand how a body dies naturally, like through the decomposing process, then of course there's so many things you got to fear over there. You might, the witch thing sounds pretty good.
Well, I'm not sure I could go there with you, but I see your point. But indeed, it's comprehensible in a certain way. So yeah,
the unknown is, I think, very scary, and it just gives reason. But with any reason comes these other things that I don't know if people think that deeply about. Like,
No,
like the way you're thinking, I'm like,
don't.
yeah, you're right. But I'm like, I don't think you think that deeply. It's like,
this comes back to the kid that stepped on the toad in the playground. People, I discovered this as an anthropologist. I think deeply about things like this, and most people, they really just don't.
Well, there's a comfort in just pointing towards somebody, either another person or another source. And in religion we say that often, like, just leave it up to God, and just have the belief, and so then you don't have to worry. It alleviates a lot of that stress.
I hear you, but again, that argument just doesn't move me, because I mean, I can see how, yes, if in a good situation, like you say, I'm feeling endangered, but if I believe that there's a powerful being that's looking after me, and I'm just leaving it in her hands, that can have a certain kind of comfort to it. But that's just that sort of specific situation. But if the world comes down to the willfulness of various beings, there's nasty beings too. There's all the bad things that happen. It's not just good things. And if those are all caused by will too, I can't control another person's will. Say I want you guys to do something, okay? I want you to clean my garage this weekend. It's not going to be easy to convince you to do that. But just figuring out what needs to be done and doing it myself, or working with the physical laws of cause and effect, I can get that garage cleaned easier than trying to convince someone to do it, in some cases at least.
Well, I think that's, the big thing with grief. It allows people, they go into a crisis of faith, because how could, like, a good God allow this death to occur in something in different forms, right? And you see that. And I know some of these dreams do help restore faith, which, there's religions for a reason. I think it really helps communities and people maintain a sense of support with each other in different ways, some more than others. And so I want to go back to that one dream I shared about, or I mentioned about the dream saving someone's life, was the dream in your article where I believe the father was thinking it was a witch that killed the son. But then the mother, I believe, had the dream of the son saying that his death was from natural causes, and to tell dad that
That's
it
right.
wasn't a witch. Yeah, which I thought was, I'm like, wow, like, so that dream saved a life, where other dreams will kill a life.
Yes, indeed. So it matters what you believe dreams are and what they can do. It will have a big impact on how you understand not just the dream, but what you do afterwards, and it can be absolutely life and death consequences. So I think that's the really important takeaway. So people are going to believe all kinds of things that don't match reality as we're able to understand it scientifically. We're not gonna just change that quickly, if ever. Probably never going to be able to completely change that, but at least understanding that will give us a handle on it.
Yeah, and I want to sort of also mention, because I know we're running out of time, but I want to, if you can go back and talk about your experience having your own dream of deceased while being a part of a new culture and what that meant for you in understanding.
Sure. Well, the story was, so I was studying their beliefs in ghosts and spirits and things, and I now understand that when I dreamed about a ghost in the field, that was my brain comparing what I was learning, their ideas about ghosts, with my old ideas about ghosts that I'd learned as a child. So the dream was actually kind of a waking vision. I was just on the edge of waking up, and I saw the ghost of my dead sister, who had died many years before, appear, and she was nasty and harassing me and possibly hurting me, and I woke up and what most struck me at that moment was that I was actually scared by it, because I was at that point thoroughly convinced that ghosts are imaginary. So it really impressed me that I could be scared by this, even though my waking self did not believe in it at all and was not worried. So that gave me a great insight and an empathy, on how dreams can convince people to believe in these things. They really feel so convincing, especially at the time. And then if you get social support that was a ghost, that's going to really cement that, in people's minds. But the way I came to understand it more later was I thought about it a lot, and what seemed strange to me was that my sister, first of all, I had dreamt about my sister being dead before, many years before when it had happened, but it wasn't a threatening situation. It was more just, this is weird, my sister is not alive anymore. And the dream was of her being buried, and it was just weird trying to make sense of it all for a little boy's mind. And this time, my sister was a nasty, threatening ghost. And so the nasty threateningness is like, where did that come from? I didn't have, I'd not had any anxieties or worries about this sister or worries about ghosts or life after death. But the local people had been telling me, don't go out at night. There's ghosts that can hurt you, and dead people can cause problems, and so I was absorbing this culture and studying it, and it was interacting with my home culture in my brain as my brain was updating its model of reality. And so this juxtaposed images of my traditional ghosts and the new ghosts produced this hybrid for my dreaming mind. And because I remembered the image into waking life, it could have a stronger impact on my thought than it would have if it had just been processing that I forgot as soon as I woke up.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting how it combined, and it was giving you a sense of understanding of basically how they feel when they have that type of dream. And I think too, it's good to clarify that I guess the deceased can affect the dreamer in many ways, and one is because I think they're, if I get the story right, they're still attached to the living, and they kind of want sometimes the dreamer to die. Is that right? So that they can be together?
Yeah, that's their idea, is that the dead miss the living just like we miss the dead, and so they want us to be dead so that we'll come join them.
Yeah. So interesting, because I don't hear that in my culture anyways.
That's right.
Heard something like that before.
No, indeed. Yeah, it's one of those things that's charmingly different from one culture to another.
And so the other thing I want to sort of ask, because you just touched on it, could you just go back to your relationship with your sister? You said you were young when she died. Could you just go through that event and how you worked through some of that grief?
Okay, so I was 10 years old, and my sister was 15, and she was accidentally shot at a party. So it was more, I was just a kid, so I don't really have much memory of it particularly. Of course, it was shocking and sad, but it's not like I don't remember having a particular grief process. And the only dreams that I remember from that event was I remember seeing seeing a scene in a cemetery of her being buried, and thinking to myself, that's weird, that's weird that she's buried, But it was more, this is strange. Now this is the memory of a man decades after the event, so it's really hard for me to recreate what I actually went through in that time. So I can't do it with do any justice.
No, it's understandable, and at that time, grief really wasn't talked about much. Do you know? Was there a funeral or a ceremony that you went to? Because I know back in those days, I guess, right? Kids really weren't allowed or weren't brought to funerals. So do you know if you went?
Oh, good question. Now, so this was 1972. I don't have a memory of the funeral, but there must have been. It's just, when you get older, you start not you don't really remember details of childhood. At least I don't. Maybe it means I'm really over the hill. but so I can't say for certain. But I don't remember it being like I shouldn't be there as a child. Sorry, I just can't really answer that question. I just don't remember well enough. I'll ask my older sisters, and they would remember.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting just for me to hear, just to give maybe some understanding of that dream, because with children, I know a lot of times they'll have these scenarios that come into place to give them understanding that of what happened for many of the times. And sometimes I've heard anyways, like people have dreams like this and they just never were able to go or attend. And so it's like they're getting to attend that within their dream world kind of thing to make sense of it. Yeah. So I was just really curious, or if it was you went and then it was just like trying to absorb that memory, right? So it was like, those are the two thoughts I was just thinking about.
Good question. I would be, knowing my parents, I would be surprised if they hadn't taken me to the funeral. There must have been a funeral, and I must have been there. I just don't remember. But I will definitely ask my older sisters, and I'll get back to you in an email and tell you what the answer was.
That's cool. I appreciate that. It just allows me to just update my information, because I'm continuing to evolve my understanding of how these dreams play a role in people's lives and how they, I think, can work with us as we process the grief, because it's such a hard process for so many people. As you sort of try to work through emotions we really just haven't sat with and for most of our life, and then we have this abundance of feelings and changes that are going on, and just any kind of new info I can get can always help the next person that I meet.
Sure. Well, that's another side of dreams that we haven't really talked about, which is their role in emotional adjustment. And there's a scholar named Cartwright, you might be familiar with her work, who's written quite a lot about dreams and as emotional adjustment, and especially to upsetting things that happen, and you can work through these things. And I think that idea is very compatible with the scientific idea that I've been talking about, that it's just the brain is comparing various things, including emotional things, and what's going on here, just trying to make sense of it, finding a way forward. So, yeah.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I've really appreciated just talking with you and learning so much. Like I could just sit here for hours, and I'll probably call you off air and just talk more at some time in the future. But yeah, what you're doing is just so amazing, and I hope more people find your work, because I found it very randomly, but I'm now really pushing your work when I do different talks and stuff to showcase the other aspects of these dreams as we move forward. So hopefully we can make use of your work a little bit more in the world to really just get people to understand discernment and have empathy for different cultures, and to just realize that there's so much to the dreaming world that we just need to know as we sort of help those that we meet. So I just want to thank you for that work that you are doing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your interest, and I agree with you 100% on what you just said.
All right. So our last question on the podcast is always, if you could dream of someone who has died, it could be your sister or anyone else, what would that dream look like to you?
Oh gosh, that's really hard to answer. What would a dream look like of someone who has died? I'm not going to give you a good podcastable answer to that question, because I can't, because I have such an odd idea about death. I mean, for me, death is the end. It's the end of the body's running, and the body is us. So it's like so someone I lost, more recently is my father, and I didn't have dreams about him particularly when he died, but it was definitely moving when he died, and I miss him and everything. But so if I imagine what would it be like to have a dream of him that I'm happy with, I'm very happy with the notion that he stopped running, and that he had a good life and we had good times together, and that's over now. And and the molecules have moved in different directions, and things are happening in different ways. So to me, that's maybe the same way many religious people find comfort in there being an afterlife of some kind that's pleasant. I find great comfort in there being no afterlife, in that to live now, and to appreciate it and to know it will end, and the good and the bad, and it'll so a satisfying dream of say my father being dead. Well, I mean it's just like memories of him being around, but then also comfort that he's no more.
My question would have been, before you just said that, is so you wouldn't want a positive dream, but you are open to that idea, which is great.
Yeah. So I mean, my dad does appear in my dreams occasionally, and when I wake up, it's like, oh yeah, he's not alive. That's
yeah. So you don't need a new TV show. You're happy with the rerun of a old memory that's nice, and whatever you guys had fun doing together. Do you guys have any hobbies or anything?
That's right. So so it's not like I want to know anything about him. I think that's what it boils down to. I think maybe for a lot of people who have more religious style grief dreams, they have the satisfaction of seeing, oh, my loved one is happy and okay in some way. They're still alive, in fact. It was just a sort of illusion that they died, and they get comfort in that. And I'm not looking for that at all, because I'm not uncomfortable with death, except for, of course, it's not pleasant yet. It's like, yes, it's hard to go through, but you go through it and you mourn and then you move on, and that's what works for me. Yeah, so I like when my dad appears in dreams. It's fun, but it's not like this changes my relationship with him, or it changes my understanding of what's happened to him, and I'm able to cope with it better. I guess because I have coped with it, and it's it'd be nice if he could live forever, but he didn't, and that's okay.
Well, that's what's amazing about just people having these dreams. Just I found in the research that if you're spiritual or not, it doesn't really make a difference in people having these types of dreams. And so it's not really about, oh, if you believe in an afterlife, you're going to have more of these. We're just having them, right? And just like, and then they tend to be very positive, and they help people in different ways. As Sean was saying, like some of these dreams do just replay old memories. You get to have a chance to go back in time and be a part of that scene again. And I think, and feel that love that you shared. And I think that's an amazing aspect of these. And then there's that interpretation part when you wake up. Well, some people will believe that it's something, other people just say, oh, that was just a beautiful dream. It's a work of art, that I was a part of. And I think that's the beauty of it, and that's where you sit, and which is great. And so, as Sean was saying, what was a positive memory that you had of your father?
Oh, well, probably, taking walks. He was a big nature lover. And going all the way back to when I was a kid, we would go for walks in the woods, and he would point out the different species of trees, and he'd point out constellations to me and teach me about all kinds of things in the natural world. So that's probably my most pleasant memory of him.
That's a beautiful one, especially with the type of person you are that we've gotten to know, being an inquisitive person. That's great to have someone like that, or in your life, who kind of guided you and was able to point out things and stimulate that curiosity.
Well, that's for sure. You're right.
This has been an incredible conversation, Roger. And like Joshua was saying, we could do this for another 4 or 5 hours, and have an amazing time. But unfortunately, the listeners may not be happy with that. So we're gonna. Yeah. Is there any location or anything where people can find your work if they wanted to, or purchase your book?
Oh, well, I would just do a search for my name, Roger Ivar Lohmann, and you'll find various of my articles and publications pop up. And
you're teaching at Trent University. Can people take a course from you online, or do you have to be actually on campus these days?
Well, right now there's no classes. When they say next year we will be in person, we'll see. But yes, I do teach at the Durham campus of Trent University, which is located in Oshawa, Ontario, and so I teach various courses. And we do touch on dreams in some of them. In fact, I had a seminar last term, which was online. It was on the anthropology of dreaming, and I had one student. So you all missed your opportunity.
Wow. Well, hey, this is a call to action to all the listeners out there in Ontario, our few listeners that we do have in the area. Support your local anthropology department and take a course with Roger.
That's right. Would love to see you.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, so to our listeners, tune in to the next episode. And we'd like to end the podcast with love and gratitude from us to you. Thank you for listening to the episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to know more about the topic, please check out our platform at griefdreams.ca. On there, you can take our 2 online courses. Number 1 is a Grief Dreams workshop by Dr. Joshua Black, which is designed to help you learn all about the topic. And number 2 is Crazy in Love, using romantic relationships as a vehicle for growth, which is designed to make you rethink modern intimate relationships. And that's by Dr. Joshua Black and Jade Carling Black. On the website, you can also book a one-on-one Grief Dreams consulting session with Dr. Black. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, @GriefDreams. And we have 2 clubs on Clubhouse that you can follow, Grief Dreams and Grief Cafe. If you have Facebook, you can follow our Grief Dreams podcast page to be notified of when we release new episodes. You can also join the Grief Dreams Facebook group to share your dreams or hear more dreams of others. Once again, to help support the podcast, please subscribe and rate the podcast on the platform you listen to it on. This helps our show come up when people search for Grief Dreams podcast. Also, you can become a member of the podcast through Patreon. We have 3 membership levels, $1.50 a month, $7 a month, and $20 a month. And again, this money helps us run the podcast. You can find the Patreon link in the show notes. We would like to thank all those who continue to support us. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you can be comforted by your dreams tonight.